Hello everyone and welcome to GTA Online Racing episode 35. Now in this video I'd like to talk a little bit more about an idea I have to better represent how good each racer is on GTA Online, and that is the Racing Performance Measurement, or RPM. Now, as we all probably know, the only way to really compare how good racers are on GTA Online at the moment, without actually getting into a race with them, is the win-loss ratio. You get one win for winning a race, and if you come second to 16th, you get a loss. Now, I've talked about this in the past, but that is completely meaningless. There's absolutely no point in paying any attention to that whatsoever. I certainly don't. It means absolutely nothing. You could get 100 wins against random people very easily and still come up a lot worse than someone who gets 100 losses against good opposition. It's absolutely meaningless as a form of representation of how good somebody is, and I would certainly don't even pay any attention to it. Try not to look at it at all. It totally doesn't mean anything, and it's not a good representation whatsoever. The people have had the idea, and I've had the idea before, to include sort of second places and third places, and you could even have a graph of how many places you actually achieve all the way from 1st to 16th. But even that isn't very good for a racing situation either, because you could just enter races with 2 or 3 people and get a load of wins and second places, which again is a lot more meaningless to getting wins and second places when you're up against 16 people. So there needs to be something different. There needs to be something a little bit better than just a win-loss. Win-loss makes sense in death matches, captures, things like that. It makes a lot more sense in something like that. It doesn't make any sense when it comes to racing, because of the very fact that racing isn't just cut and dried. There is a winner and there is a loser. Yes, there is. Obviously, you could say that second place is the first of the losers, and most people would probably agree with that in terms of racing. But it isn't just all about that. Just because you come second in a really good race with 16 really high level people doesn't mean to say that you should mark it down as a loss, because it's a bit harsh considering there's people a lot worse out there winning races against a lot worse opposition. And this is why I quite like playlists, because playlists actually give points for first all the way down to 16th, or it might be 14th, 13th, something like that. Obviously the first, second and third places are given more points relative to other positions. So first place gets 15 points, then there's a 3-point gap to second place, who gets 12, then 10, then 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, but that over the course of a playlist where you are racing sort of 8 races, that makes a lot more sense, because then you can go for these second and third places, you can go for that sort of thing and feel like it actually means something, because it's all going towards your points for the whole playlist, and it's going to be the best racer overall who will win a playlist, rather than just sort of winning a race, getting a win, or coming second to 16th and getting a loss. That makes no sense. So that's why playlists have it right in that sense, but there needs to be a better way to do it in general. And my idea for this comes from my karting series that I do. I obviously my real life racing series. If you haven't seen that already, click the link down below. I'll put it in there. It does seem like the people who do watch that really do enjoy it, and it becomes one of their favorite series. It's just that not a lot of people watch it, I guess you could say, compared to my GTA videos. So if you are interested in racing, definitely go watch that. It is a little bit different. There's some really good battles in there, some really good races, and yeah, as I said, it's a little bit different. But this comes from this whole idea of racing performance measurement. Now, every time I go karting, I get a printout with all of my results on, and I have a little number next to my name that is my racing performance measurement. Now, that increases and decreases depending on how well I do in a certain race. And this is basically based on the ELO system that came from chess and has been adapted to other sorts of forms of sport and things like that. And it's quite a widespread system now, but basically, on a very basic level, you have a base number RPM, say 1000. Now, if you win a race, that number increases, and if you lose a race, that number decreases. Now, it is a little bit more complicated than that. That is on the absolute basic level. But basically, the idea is that if you go up against people with higher RPM levels than you and you beat them, then your RPM will increase a lot more than if you were up against people with lower RPM than you. So for example, if you go into a race with an RPM of 1500 and all of the other opposition are less than 1000 and you win a race, you might only increase by 10 or 20, something like that. But if you were to have that same RPM of 1500 and went into a race with a load of guys with RPMs of 2000 or higher and still managed to win, your RPM would increase a lot quicker. It would increase by a couple of hundred, and soon if you continued to do well against those guys, it would be up to their level, and beyond that 2000 level. Similarly, if you start losing races against worse opposition, your RPM will decrease a lot quicker. So if you went into that race with 1500 RPM against a load of 800s and you lost you lost quite well, you were always at the bottom of the pack in these races, your RPM would decrease by a couple of hundred until you became on their level. And similarly, if you lose against people who have a lot higher RPM than you, then your RPM won't decrease that much either as well. So hopefully this will be a bit easier to explain in the shape of an example. So imagine your base RPM level is 1000 and you enter a race with another 8 people, no, say 7 people, so it's 8 in total. You enter a race with another 7 people whose RPM are all 1000 as well. And therefore, you're all equally skilled. That's what that would be telling you, and that would be telling you that on average you would expect to win 1 out of those 8 races. Because you're all equally skilled, you would expect to share the results throughout the course of 8 races. You would all expect to win 1. So imagine that is exactly what happens. You all win 1 race. Then by the end of that 8 races, your RPMs across the board would all be exactly the same. They might increase by 2 or 3, something like that, just depending on how the system would work. But by the end of those 8 races, if you all shared wins, they would all your RPM points would be exactly the same as they were when they started, because you've kind of gone to the expectations. You haven't shown to be better than those guys. Nobody else in that room has shown to be better than anybody else, because you've all shared the wins, which is exactly what was expected, because you all had the same RPM. Now, say you still have that 1000 RPM, but you go into a race with 7 other people and they all have 2000 RPM, and you place sort of 4th or 5th in each of those races. Your RPM will still increase. By the end of that playlist, by the end of those 8 races, say, you might get up to 1500, because although you aren't winning races, you are still beating people who have a higher RPM than you. And similarly, those guys who you are beating, their RPM will start to come down. So by the end of the 8 races, by the end of a playlist like that, the guys who are winning all the time will continue to have that around 2000 RPM. The guys who you were beating, who used to be on 2000 RPM, will be down to say maybe 1800, 1700, something like that. And then you, by coming in that mid pack, will have increased your RPM from 1000 to say 1500. So that's how it all works. That's how it all sort of filters together and evens itself out to give a much better representation of how good people are. And an added benefit to it is that it makes every single position count, just like with playlist racing. It's worth your time and your efforts to try and get that 2nd place, that 3rd place, that 4th place if you can't get the win. Because if you just tootle around at the back or decide to just quit out of the race, your RPM will take a much bigger hit than if you tried to get that 2nd or that 3rd. Even if you lose a race to someone who's got a higher RPM than you but still manage to beat everyone else, that's still good. That's still going to increase your RPM relatively anyway, so it's worth going for those extra positions. So that is just my idea of how we can incorporate this RPM system, this sort of ELO system, a racing performance measurement number, into racing in GTA Online. It's a much better representation of how good somebody is, and basically it gives you something to fight for. At the moment there's no point in racing against better opposition, because you might as well race against nobodies and get a win on your record. That's why it means nothing. That's why it's totally meaningless. So that's my idea, guys. Let me know down below what you think about this. Obviously it's very similar to the ELO system, but this has come from my karting series and the stuff I do there. They have the same sort of system. It seems to work quite well. Let me know down below what you think. Should they implement this into GTA Online? Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.